445, chapters 60 and 61 of The Count of Monte Cristo. Book talk begins at 6:06.
Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 445, Mommy's Juice Box. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/Craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Well, hello. I've mostly survived the bar mitzvah intact. I am vertical. I am recording. These are all good things that remind me that I'm alive. We all started to get sick right after the bar mitzvah. Because, of course, as happened to me when I was teaching school, the second I start to relax after something like this, whether it's a semester of teaching high school or planning for and executing a bar mitzvah, minute I relax, immune system says, oh, it's vacation, and I get sick. But I'm feeling much better today. I am recording for you, and I have something fun to share. So over on the Craftlit live stream from this week, it was pretty much entirely things that were cute and crafty from the bar mitzvah party. One of the things that I saved to share with you here is what I did in the afternoon. So the services is in the morning, and we had a nice family dinner in the evening. And in between, we thought, we need to give kids a chance to get the wiggles out. So swim party. This is what my son came up with. And there's a little observation window at our local Y where we go to the gym. And I thought, oh, well, the parents aren't supposed to be on the pool deck. So we're supposed to be in that little observation area, sitting on couches and chairs and watching kids splash around and play. And wouldn't it be nice to relax with a nice cold glass of wine, which I'm sure we're not able to do. And then I remembered my friend Jackie in Croton-on-Hudson, when those small, you know how you can get wine in a box, and then those small, like 2-glass wine boxes came out that had a screw off top, and you could put a straw into one. And my friend Jackie called them Mommy's Juice Boxes. Well, I knew that would be too much of a dead giveaway. I actually bought a couple of them and covered the labels with duct tape, like, pretty patterned duct tape, so that you couldn't tell what was in the wine box. And you could tell it was a wine box. So I kept thinking, and I went on Amazon just on a whim, and I found a product that, whether you're going to fill it with wine or not, is probably not a bad thing to have on hand. These are called Activiva. So it's active, ACTIV, and then instead of finishing the word normally, it is IVA. So active and Viva, all smashed together. These are empty, clean, non-BPA, roll-upable sports bottles. I think they hold 12 ounces total. It may actually be a little bit more. And it has a collar on it with a screw-off top, and it's a pop top. So you've got the white collar with the pop top attached. And then beneath that collar, there's a ring that has a very thin band that comes up, and a cap is attached to that, and that covers the pop top part. So you have many, many different ways to keep this thing from leaking, and it works. It had one of the tightest fits I've ever come across on a snap down pop top lid. Fantastic. The plastic that's used in it is durable. It doesn't feel like it's going to burst. It didn't burst. And I had a bunch of these shoved into a big Trader Joe's cloth bag. It worked brilliantly. The only thing I will tell you, and I'm putting a link to this particular product in the show notes. It's no affiliation, yada, yada, but wow, it worked perfectly for us. However, the one thing I would say is I let the red wine breathe a bit in these bags. So I set them up in a box so that they'd stand up vertically and breathe. And I actually let them breathe overnight. And that was a good thing. And then in the morning, I screwed the caps on and I made sure they were super tight. And I did it to all of them. Super tight, super tight, super tight. By the time we were at the swim, maybe 3 of them had started to come loose, just enough to leak a little bit. But when I went to check on the cap, I went and got a good quarter turn out of it. So I would say just double check your cap before putting something like Hawaiian Punch in, because that would not be fun to try and get out of children's clothes at all, she said, knowing what it is like to try and get Hawaiian Punch out of children's clothes. So that is my crafty tip for you, how to make a mommy's juice box. No one will ever have to know. And it worked out really well. Everybody was giggling and having a good time, and not just because of the wine. So there you have it. All right, Count of Monte Cristo, because we have 2 chapters today and they're fun. First off, you need to remember where we were before. In chapter 59, Noirtier just did the whole trick with the blinking his eyes for the notaries and convinced them that if his granddaughter marries Franz d'Epinay, he will disinherit her. And that, in effect, means de Villefort doesn't get the inheritance either. Instead, it defaults and it goes to a charity. And it sounds kind of like he might have been able to pick which charity he Villefort. But obviously, this is a rather intricate part of estate law. So there it is. However, as this chapter rolled on, I found myself having more and more trouble remembering all of the dirt the Count of Monte Cristo has on Villefort. So just kind of keep in the back of your mind all of the things that Villefort has done or may have done wrong in his lifetime that the Count has discovered. Because you're going to start to see one piece of a master plan, just the tip of it, start to roll out today. You're going to hear a reference to Noirtier having been more of a Jacobin. If you listen to Tale of Two Cities, the Jacques, the revolutionaries during the French Revolution, in 1789, after, revolutionaries and revolutionary thinkers formed the Jacobin Society, and they were affiliated with Robespierre. So that gives you a little context for them, maybe. But these were the guys who actually kind of started the Reign of Terror. So they're tough. And we are reminded that Noirtier was a part of that. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you listen to the rather intricate part of our first chapter. The second chapter we listen to today is just a lot of fun. The one thing that I told you, many, many chapters ago, chapters 13 and 14, and we're on 60 and 61 now. So during chapters 13 and 14, we talked about telegraphs, and that these were not electrical telegraphs right now. They were the semaphore telegraphs, the big towers with the arms that you would have to crank, and it was very difficult and time-consuming and really rather dull, but important. And in fact, when I was showing my son pictures of these things, my poor children get shown all of this stuff. Their eyes roll back in their head, but they're polite about it. He said, that's like on the Great Wall of China, the warning system that they had where they would light fires. And yes, it is. This one's just a little bit more detailed. And you will hear those details this time. Whereas before, in chapters 13 and 14, we just kind of heard them mentioned. The fact of them was mentioned. Now you're going to get to see what it's like to be there. And you're going to hear another brilliant piece of Count manipulation in this one. There were many, many telegraph lines that went from Paris out to the coasts and out to other countries. So there was a line to Spain, there's a line to Belgium, there's a line to Italy, and that actually does play into our chapters. I think that's everything you need to know. The second chapter today is mostly just a lot of fun. The first one is rather intricate. So here we go with chapters 60 and 61 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas.
Chapter 60. The Telegraph. Monsieur and Madame de Villefort found on their return that the Count of Monte Cristo, who had come to visit them in their absence, had been ushered into the drawing-room, and was still waiting for them there. Madame de Villefort, who had not yet sufficiently recovered from her late emotion to allow of her entertaining visitors so immediately, retired to her bedroom, while the procureur, who could better depend upon himself, proceeded at once to the salon. Although Monsieur de Villefort flattered himself that to all outward view he had completely masked the feelings which were passing in his mind, he did not know that the cloud was still lowering on his brow, so much so that the Count, whose smile was radiant, immediately noticed his sombre and thoughtful air. "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo, after the first compliments were over, "what is the matter with you, Monsieur de Villefort? Have I arrived at the moment when you are drawing up an indictment for a capital crime?" Villefort tried to smile. "No, Count," he replied. "I am the only victim in this case. It is I who lose my cause, and it is ill luck, obstinacy, and folly which have caused it to be decided against me." "To what do you refer?" said Monte Cristo, with well-feigned interest. "Have you really met with some great misfortune?" "Oh no, monsieur," said Villefort with a bitter smile. "It is only a loss of money which I have sustained. Nothing worth mentioning, I assure you." "True," said Monte Cristo. "The loss of a sum of money becomes almost immaterial with a fortune such as you possess, and to one of your philosophic spirit." "It is not so much the loss of the money that vexes me," said Villefort. "Though, after all, 900,000 francs are worth regretting. But I am the more annoyed with this fate, chance, or whatever you please to call the power which has destroyed my hopes and my fortune, and may blast the prospects of my child also, as it is all occasioned by an old man relapsed into second childhood." "What do you say?" said the Count. 900,000 francs! It is indeed a sum which might be regretted even by a philosopher. And who is the cause of all this annoyance?" "My father, as I told you." "Monsieur Noirtier? But I thought you told me he had become entirely paralyzed, and that all his faculties were completely destroyed." "Yes, his bodily faculties, for he can neither move nor speak. Nevertheless, he thinks, acts, and wills in the manner I have described. I left him about 5 minutes ago, and he is now occupied in dictating his will to 2 notaries." "But to do this he must have spoken." "He has done better than that. He has made himself understood." "How was such a thing possible?" "By the help of his eyes, which are still full of life, and, as you perceive, possess the power of inflicting mortal injury." "My dear," said Madame de Villefort, who had just entered the room, "perhaps you exaggerate the evil." "Good morning, madame," said the Count, bowing. Madame de Villefort acknowledged the salutation with one of her most gracious smiles. "What is this that Monsieur de Villefort has been telling me?" demanded Monte Cristo. "And what incomprehensible misfortune?" "Incomprehensible is not the word," interrupted the procureur, shrugging his shoulders. "It's an old man's caprice." "And there is no means of making him revoke his decision?" "Yes," said Madame de Villefort, "and it is still entirely in the power of my husband to cause the will which is now in prejudice of Valentine to be altered in her favor." The Count, who perceived that Monsieur and Madame de Villefort were beginning to speak in parables, appeared to pay no attention to the conversation, and feigned to be busily engaged in watching Edward, who was mischievously pouring some ink into the bird's water-glass. "My dear," said Villefort in answer to his wife, You know I have never been accustomed to play the patriarch in my family, nor have I ever considered that the fate of a universe was to be decided by my nod. Nevertheless, it is necessary that my will should be respected in my family, and that the folly of an old man and the caprice of a child should not be allowed to overturn a project which I have entertained for so many years. The Baron d'Épinay was my friend, as you know, and an alliance with his son is the most suitable thing that could possibly be arranged. Do you think, said Madame de Villefort, that Valentine is in league with him? She has always been opposed to this marriage, and I should not be at all surprised if what we have just seen and heard is nothing but the execution of a plan concerted between them. Madame de Villefort, believe me, a fortune of 900,000 francs is not so easily renounced. She could, nevertheless, make up her mind to renounce the world, sir, since it is only about a year ago that she herself proposed entering a convent. Never mind, replied Villefort. I say that this marriage shall be consummated. Notwithstanding your father's wishes to the contrary, said Madame de Villefort, selecting a new point of attack. That is a serious thing. Monte Cristo, who pretended not to be listening, heard, however, every word that was said. Madame, replied Villefort, I can truly say that I have always entertained a high respect for my father, because to the natural feeling of a relationship was added the consciousness of his moral superiority. The name of father is sacred in two senses. He should be reverenced as the author of our being, and as a master whom we ought to obey. But under the present circumstance, I am justified in doubting the wisdom of an old man who, because he hated the father, vents his anger on the son. It would be ridiculous in me to regulate my conduct by such caprice. I shall still continue to preserve the same respect toward Monsieur Noirtier. I will suffer, without complaint, the pecuniary deprivation to which he has subjected me, but I shall remain firm in my determination, and the world shall see which party has reason on his side. Consequently, I shall marry my daughter to the Baron Franz d'Épinay, because I consider it would be a proper and eligible match for her to make, and, in short, because I choose to bestow my daughter's hand on whomever I please. What? Said the Count, the approbation of whose eye Villefort had frequently solicited during his speech. What do you say, that Monsieur Noirtier disinherits Mademoiselle de Villefort because she is going to marry Monsieur le Baron Franz d'Épinay? Yes, sir, that is the reason, said Villefort, shrugging his shoulders. The apparent reason, at least, said Madame de Villefort. The real reason, madame, I can assure you. I know my father. But I want to know in what way Monsieur d'Épinay can have displeased your father more than any other person. I believe I know Monsieur Franz d'Épinay, said the Count. Is he not the son of General de Quesnel, who was created Baron d'Épinay by Charles X? The same, said Villefort. Well, but he is a charming young man, according to my ideas. He is, which makes me believe that it is only an excuse of Monsieur Noirtier to prevent his granddaughter marrying. Old men are always so selfish in their affection, said Madame de Villefort. But, said Monte Cristo, do you not know any cause for this hatred? Ah, ma foi, who is to know? Perhaps it is some political difference. My father and the Baron d'Épinay lived in the stormy times, of which I only saw the ending, said Villefort. Was not your father a Bonapartist? Asked Monte Cristo. I think I remember that you told me something of that kind. My father has been a Jacobin more than anything else, said Villefort, carried by his emotion beyond the bounds of prudence. And the senator's robe, which Napoleon cast on his shoulders, only served to disguise the old man without any degree of changing him. When my father conspired, it was not for the Emperor, it was against the Bourbon. For Monsieur Noirtier possessed this peculiarity: he never projected any utopian schemes which could never be realized, but strove for possibilities, and he applied to the realization of these possibilities the terrible theories of the mountain, theories that never shrank from any means that were deemed necessary to bring about the desired result. "Well," said Monte Cristo, "it is just as I thought. It was politics which brought Noirtier and Monsieur d'Épinay into personal contact. Although General d'Épinay served under Napoleon, did he not still retain royalist sentiments? And was he not the person who was assassinated one evening on leaving a Bonapartist meeting, to which he had been invited on the supposition that he favoured the cause of the Emperor?" Villefort looked at the Count almost with terror. "Am I mistaken, then?" said Monte Cristo. "No, sir. The facts were precisely what you have stated," said Madame de Villefort, "and it was to prevent the renewal of old feuds that Monsieur de Villefort formed the idea of uniting in the bonds of affection the two children of these inveterate enemies." "It was a sublime and charitable thought," said Monte Cristo, "and the whole world should applaud it. It would be noble to see Mademoiselle Noirtier de Villefort assuming the title of Madame France d'Épinay." Villefort shuddered, and looked at Monte Cristo as if he wished to read in his countenance the real feelings which had dictated the words he had just uttered. But the Count completely baffled the procureur, and prevented him from discovering anything beneath the never-varying smile he was so constantly in the habit of assuming. "Although," said Villefort, "it will be a serious thing for Valentine to lose her grandfather's fortune, I do not think that Monsieur d'Épinay will be frightened at this pecuniary loss. He will perhaps hold me in greater esteem than the money itself, seeing that I sacrificed everything in order to keep my word with him. Besides, he knows that Valentine is rich in right of her mother, and that she will, in all probability, inherit the fortune of Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Méran, her mother's parents, who both love her tenderly." "And who are fully as well worth loving and tending as Monsieur Noirtier," said Madame de Villefort. "Besides, they are to come to Paris in about a month, and Valentine, after the affront she has received, need not consider it necessary to continue to bury herself alive by being shut up with Monsieur Noirtier." The Count listened with satisfaction to this tale of wounded self-love and defeated ambition. "But it seems to me," said Monte Cristo, "and I must begin by asking your pardon for what I am about to say, that if Monsieur Noirtier disinherits Mademoiselle de Villefort because she is going to marry a man whose father he detested, he cannot have the same cause of complaint against this dear Edward." "True," said Madame de Villefort, with an intonation of voice which it is impossible to describe. "Is it not unjust, shamefully unjust? Poor Edward is as much Monsieur Noirtier's grandchild as Valentine, and yet, if she had not been going to marry Monsieur France, Monsieur Noirtier would have left her all his money, and supposing Valentine to be disinherited by her grandfather, she will still be 3 times richer than he." The Count listened and said no more. "Count," said Villefort, "we will not entertain you any longer with our family misfortune. It is true that my patrimony will go to endow charitable institutions, and my father will have deprived me of my lawful inheritance, without any reason for doing so, but I shall have the satisfaction of knowing that I have acted like a man of sense and feeling. Monsieur d'Épinay, to whom I promised the interest of this sum, shall receive it, even if I endure the most cruel privations." "However," said Madame de Villefort, returning to the one idea which incessantly occupied her mind, "perhaps it would be better to explain this unlucky affair to Monsieur d'Épinay, in order to give him the opportunity of himself renouncing his claim to the hand of Mademoiselle de Villefort." "Ah, that would be a great pity," said Villefort. "A great piety," said Monte Cristo. "Undoubtedly," said Villefort, moderating the tone of his voice. "A marriage once concerted and then broken off throws a sort of discredit on a young lady. Then again, the old reports which I was so anxious to put an end to will instantly gain ground. No, it will all go well. Monsieur d'Épinay, if he is an honorable man, will consider himself more than ever pledged to Mademoiselle de Villefort, unless he were actuated by a decided feeling of avarice, but that is impossible." "I agree with Monsieur de Villefort," said Monte Cristo, fixing his eyes on Madame de Villefort. "And if I were sufficiently intimate with him to allow of giving my advice, I would persuade him, since I have been told Monsieur d'Épinay is coming back to settle this affair at once, beyond all possibility of revocation. I will answer for the success of a project which will reflect so much honor on Monsieur de Villefort." The procureur arose, delighted with the proposition, but his wife slightly changed colour. "Well, that is all that I wanted, and I will be guided by a counsellor such as you," said he, extending his hand to Monte Cristo. "Therefore, let everyone here look upon what has passed today as if it had not happened, and as though we had never thought of such a thing as a change in our original plans." "Sir," said the Count, "the world, unjust as it is, will be pleased with your resolution. Your friends will be proud of you, and Monsieur d'Épinay, even if he took Mademoiselle de Villefort without any dowry, which he will not do, would be delighted with the idea of entering a family which could make such sacrifices in order to keep a promise and fulfill a duty." At the conclusion of these words, the Count rose to depart. "Are you going to leave us, Count?" said Madame de Villefort. "I am sorry to say I must do so, madame. I only came to remind you of your promise for Saturday." "Did you fear that we should forget it?" "You are very good, madame, but Monsieur de Villefort has so many important and urgent occupations." "My husband has given me his word, sir," said Madame de Villefort. "You have just seen him resolve to keep it when he has everything to lose, and surely there is more reason for his doing so where he has everything to gain." "And," said Villefort, "is it at your house in the Champs-Élysées that you receive your visitors?" "No," said Monte Cristo. "Which is precisely the reason which renders your kindness more meritorious. It is in the country." "In the country?" "Yes." "Where is it, then? Near Paris, is it not?" "Very near. Only half a league from the barriers. It is at Auteuil." "At Auteuil?" said Villefort. "True, Madame de Villefort told me you lived at Auteuil, since it was to your house that she was taken. And in what part of Auteuil do you reside?" "Rue de la Fontaine." "Rue de la Fontaine?" exclaimed Villefort in an agitated tone. "At what number?" "Number 28. "Then," cried Villefort, "was it you who bought Monsieur de Saint-Méran's house?" "Did it belong to Monsieur de Saint-Méran?" demanded Monte Cristo. "Yes," replied Madame de Villefort. "And would you believe it, Count?" "Believe what?" "You think this house pretty, do you not?" "I think it charming." "Well, my husband would never live in it." "Indeed," returned Monte Cristo. "That is a prejudice on your part, Monsieur de Villefort, for which I am quite at a loss to account." "I do not like Auteuil, sir," said the procureur, making an evident effort to appear calm. "But I hope you will not carry your antipathy so far as to deprive me of the pleasure of your company, sir," said Monte Cristo. "No, Count, I hope, I assure you I shall do my best," stammered Villefort. "Oh," said Monte Cristo, "I allow of no excuse. On Saturday at 6 o'clock I shall be expecting you, and if you fail to come, I shall think, for how do I know to the contrary, that this house, which has remained uninhabited for 20 years, must have some gloomy tradition or dreadful legend connected with it." I will come, Count. I will surely come," said Villefort eagerly. "Thank you," said Monte Cristo. "Now you must permit me to take my leave of you." "You said before that you are obliged to leave us, monsieur," said Madame de Villefort. "And you were about to tell us why, when your attention was called to some other subject." "Indeed, madame," said Monte Cristo, "I scarcely know if I dare tell you where I am going." "Nonsense. Say on." "Well, then, it is to see a thing on which I have sometimes mused for hours together." "What is it?" "A telegraph. So now I have told my secret." "A telegraph?" repeated Madame de Villefort. "Yes, a telegraph. I had often seen one placed at the end of a road on a hillock, and in the light of the sun its black arms bending in every direction always reminded me of the claws of an immense beetle, and I assure you it was never without emotion that I gazed on it, for I could not help thinking how wonderful it was that these various signs should be made to cleave the air with such precision as to convey to the distance of 300 leagues the ideas and wishes of a man sitting at a table at one end of the line to another man similarly placed at the opposite extremity, and all this effected by a simple act of volition on the part of the sender of the message. I began to think of genii, sylphs, gnomes, in short, of all the ministers of the occult sciences, until I laughed aloud at the freaks of my own imagination. Now, it never occurred to me to wish for a nearer inspection of these large insects with their long black claws, for I always feared to find under their stone wings some little human genius, fagged to death with cabals, factions, and government intrigues. But one fine day I learned that the mover of this telegraph was only a poor wretch, hired for 1,200 francs a year, and employed all day, not in studying the heavens like an astronomer, or in gazing on the water like an angler, or even in enjoying the privilege of observing the country around him, but all his monotonous life was passed in watching his white-bellied, black-clawed fellow insect 4 or 5 leagues distant from him. At length I felt a desire to study this living chrysalis more closely, and to endeavour to understand the secret part played by these insect actors when they occupy themselves simply with pulling different pieces of string. "And are you going there?" "I am." "What telegraph do you intend visiting? That of the Home Department, or of the observatory?" "Oh, no. I should find there people who would force me to understand things of which I would prefer to remain ignorant, and who would try to explain to me, in spite of myself, a mystery which even they do not understand. Ma foi, I should wish to keep my illusions concerning insects unimpaired. It is quite enough to have those dissipated which I had formed of my fellow creatures. I shall, therefore, not visit either of these telegraphs, but one in the open country, where I shall find a good-natured simpleton who knows no more than the machine he is employed to work." "You are a singular man," said Villefort. "What line would you advise me to study?" "The one that is most in use just at this time." "The Spanish one, you mean, I suppose?" "Yes." Should you like a letter to the minister that they might explain to you? No, said Monte Cristo, since, as I told you before, I do not wish to comprehend it. The moment I understand it, there will no longer exist a telegraph for me. It will be nothing more than a sign from Monsieur Duchatel or from Monsieur Montalivet, transmitted to the prefect of Bayonne, mystified by two Greek words, tele, graphein. It is the insect with black claws, and the awful word which I wish to retain in my imagination, in all its purity and all its importance. Go then, for in the course of 2 hours it will be dark, and you will not be able to see anything. Ma foi, you frighten me. Which is the nearest way? Bayonne? Yes, the road to Bayonne. And afterwards the road to Châtillon? Yes. By the tower of Montclair, you mean? Yes. Thank you. Goodbye. On Saturday I will tell you my impressions concerning the telegraph. At the door the Count was met by the two notaries, who had just completed the act which was to disinherit Valentine, and who were leaving under the conviction of having done a thing which could not fail of redounding considerably to their credit. End of chapter 60. Chapter 61. How a gardener may get rid of the dormice that eat his peaches. Not on the same night as he had intended, but the next morning, the Count of Monte Cristo went out by the Barrière d'Enfer, taking the road to Orléans. Leaving the village of Lina without stopping at the telegraph, which flourished its great bony arms as he passed, the Count reached the tower of Montlhéry, situated, as everyone knows, upon the highest point of the plain of that name. At the foot of the hill, the Count dismounted and began to ascend by a little winding path, about 18 inches wide. When he reached the summit, he found himself stopped by a hedge, upon which green fruit had succeeded to red and white flowers. Monte Cristo looked for the entrance to the enclosure, and was not long in finding a little wooden gate, working on willow hinges and fastened with a nail and string. The Count soon mastered the mechanism, the gate opened, and he then found himself in a little garden, about 20 feet long by 12 feet wide, bounded on one side by part of the hedge, which contained the ingenious contrivance we have called a gate, and on the other by the old tower, covered with ivy and studded with wallflowers. No one would have thought, in looking at this old, weather-beaten, floral-decked tower, which might be likened to an elderly dame dressed up to receive her grandchildren at a birthday feast, that it would have been capable of telling strange things, if, in addition to the menacing ears which the proverb says all walls are provided with, it had also a voice. The garden was crossed by a path of red gravel, edged by a border of thick box of many years' growth, and of a tone and colour that would have delighted the heart of Delacroix, our modern Rubens. This path was formed in the shape of the figure of 8, thus, in its windings, making a walk of 60 feet in a garden of only 20. Never had Flora, the fresh and smiling goddess of gardeners, been honoured with a purer or more scrupulous worship than that which was paid to her in this little enclosure. In fact, of the 20 rose trees which formed the parterre, not one bore the mark of the slug, nor were there evidences anywhere of the clustering aphis, which is so destructive to plants growing in a damp soil. And yet, it was not because the damp had been excluded from the garden. The earth, black as soot, the thick foliage of the trees betrayed its presence. Besides, had natural humidity been wanting, it could have been immediately supplied by artificial means, thanks to a tank of water sunk in one of the corners of the garden, and upon which were stationed a frog and a toad, who from antipathy, no doubt, always remained on the two opposite sides of the basin. There was not a blade of grass to be seen in the paths or a weed in the flower-beds. No fine lady ever trained and watered her geraniums, her cacti, and her rhododendrons with more pains than the hitherto unseen gardener bestowed upon his little enclosure. Monte Cristo stopped after having closed the gate, and fastened a string to the nail, and cast a look around. "The man at the telegraph," said he, "must either engage a gardener or devote himself passionately to agriculture." Suddenly he struck against something crouching behind a wheelbarrow filled with leaves. The something rose, uttering an exclamation of astonishment, and Monte Cristo found himself facing a man about 50 years old, who was plucking strawberries which he was placing upon grape leaves. He had 12 leaves and about as many strawberries, which on rising suddenly he let fall from his hand. "You are gathering your crop, sir," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "Excuse me, sir," replied the man, raising his hand to his cap. "I am not up there, I know, but I have only just come down." "Do not let me interfere with you in anything, my friend," said the Count. "Gather your strawberries, if indeed there are any left." "I have 10 left," said the man, "for here are 11, and I had 21, 5 more than last year. But I am not surprised. The spring has been warm this year, and strawberries require heat, sir. This is the reason that instead of the 16 I had last year, I have this year, you see, 11, already plucked 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Ah, I missed 3. They were here last night, sir, I am sure they were here. I counted them. It must be the mere Simon's son who has stolen them. I saw him strolling about here this morning. Ah, the young rascal, stealing in a garden. He does not know where that may lead him to." "Certainly it is wrong," said Monte Cristo, "but you should take into consideration the youth and greediness of the delinquent." "Of course," said the gardener, "but that does not make it the less unpleasant. But, sir, once more I beg pardon, because you are an officer that I am detaining here." And he glanced timidly at the Count's blue coat. "Calm yourself, my friend," said the Count, with the smile which he made at will either terrible or benevolent, and which now expressed only the kindliest feeling. "I am not an inspector, but a traveller brought here by a curiosity he half repents of, since he causes you to lose your time." "Ah, my time is not valuable," replied the man with a melancholy smile. "Still, it belongs to government, and I ought not to waste it. But having received the signal that I might rest for an hour," here he glanced at the sundial, for there was everything in the enclosure of Monterey, even a sundial, "and having 10 minutes before me, and my strawberries being ripe, when a day longer, by the by, sir, do you think dormice eat them?" "Indeed, I think not," replied Monte Cristo. "Dormice are bad neighbors for us who do not eat them preserved, as the Romans did." "What? Did the Romans eat them?" said the gardener. "Ate dormice?" "I have read so in Petronius," said the Count. "Really? They can't be nice, though they do say, as fat as a dormouse. It is not a wonder they are fat, sleeping all day and only waking to eat all night. Listen, last year I had 4 apricots. They stole 1. I had 1 nectarine, only 1. Well, sir, they ate half of it on the wall. A splendid nectarine, I never ate a better." "You ate it?" "That is to say, the half that was left, you understand. It was exquisite, sir. Ah, those gentlemen never choose the worst morsels, like mere Simon's son, who has not chosen the worst strawberries. But this year," continued the horticulturist, "I'll take care of it. It shall not happen, even if I shall be forced to sit by the whole night to watch when the strawberries are ripe." Monte Cristo had seen enough. Every man has a devouring passion in his heart, as every fruit has its worm. That of the telegraph man was horticulture. He began gathering the grape leaves which screened the sun from the grapes, and won the heart of the gardener. "Did you come here, sir, to see the telegraph?" he said. "Yes, if it is not contrary to the rules," "Oh, no," said the gardener. "Not in the least, since there is no danger that anyone can possibly understand what we are saying." "I have been told," said the Count, "that you do not always yourselves understand the signals you repeat." "That is true, sir, and that is what I like best," said the man, smiling. "Why do you like that best?" "Because then I have no responsibility. I am a machine here, and nothing else, and so long as I work, nothing more is required of me." "Is it possible," said Monte Cristo to himself, "that I can have met with a man that has no ambition, that would spoil my plans?" "Sir," said the gardener, glancing at the sundial, "the 10 minutes are almost up. I must return to my post. Will you go up with me?" "I will follow you." Monte Cristo entered the tower, which was divided into 3 stories. The tower contained implements, such as spades, rakes, watering pots, hung against the wall. This was all the furniture. The second was the man's conventional abode, or rather sleeping place. It contained a few poor articles of household furniture, a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stone pitcher, and some dry herbs hung up to the ceiling, which the Count recognized as sweet peas, and of which the good man was preserving the seeds. He had labelled them with as much care as if he had been master botanist in the Jardin des Plantes. "Does it require much study to learn the art of telegraphing?" asked Monte Cristo. "The study does not take long. It was acting as a supernumerary that was so tedious." "And what is the pay?" 1,000 francs, sir." "It is nothing." "No, but when we are lodged, as you perceive—" Monte Cristo looked at the room. They passed to the 3rd story. It was the telegraph room. Monte Cristo looked in turn at the 2 iron handles by which the machine was worked. "It is very interesting," he said, "but it must be very tedious for a lifetime." "Yes. At first my neck was cramped with looking at it, but at the end of a year I became used to it, and then we have our hours of recreation and our holidays." "Holidays?" "Yes."
"When?"
"When we have a fog."
"Ah, to be sure."
"Those are indeed holidays to me. I go into the garden, I plant, I prune, I trim, I kill the insects all day long."
"How long have you been here?"
10 years, and 5 as a supernumerary make 15.
"You are—"
55 years old."
"How long must you have served to claim the pension?"
"Oh, sir, 25 years."
"And how much is the pension?"
100 crowns.
"Poor humanity!" murmured Monte Cristo.
"What did you say, sir?" asked the man.
"I was saying it was very interesting."
"What was?"
"All you were showing me, and you really understand none of these signals."
"None at all."
"And have you never tried to understand them?"
"Never. Why should I?"
"But still there are some signals only addressed to you."
"Certainly."
"And do you understand them?"
"They are always the same."
"And they mean?"
"Nothing new. You have an hour, or tomorrow."
"This is simple enough," said the Count. "But look, is not your correspondent putting itself in motion?"
"Ah, yes, thank you, sir."
"And what is it saying? Anything you understand?"
"Yes. It asks if I'm ready."
"And you reply?"
"By the same sign, which at the same time tells my right-hand correspondent that I am ready, while it gives notice to my left-hand correspondent to prepare in his turn."
"It is very ingenious," said the Count.
"You will see," said the man proudly. "In 5 minutes you will speak."
"I have then 5 minutes," said Monte Cristo to himself. "It is more time than I require."
My dear sir, will you allow me to ask you a question? What is it, sir? You are fond of gardening. Passionately. And you would be pleased to have, instead of this terrace of 20 feet, an enclosure of 2 acres. Sir, I should make a terrestrial paradise of it. You live badly on your 1,000 francs. Badly enough, but yet I do live. Yes, but you have a wretchedly small garden. True, the garden is not large. And then, such as it is filled with dormice, who eat everything. Ah, they are my scourges. Tell me, should you have the misfortune to turn your head while your right-hand correspondent was telegraphing? I should not see him. Then what would happen? I could not repeat the signals. And then? Not having repeated them through negligence, I should be fined. How much? 100 francs. The 10th of your income. That would be fine work. Ah, said the man. Has it ever happened to you? Said Monte Cristo. Once, sir, when I was grafting a rose tree. Well, suppose you were to alter a signal and substitute another. Ah, that is another case. I should be turned off and lose my pension. 300 francs. 100 crowns, yes, sir. So you see that I am not likely to do any of these things. Not even for 15 years' wages. Come, it is worth thinking about. For 15,000 francs? Yes. Sir, you alarm me. Nonsense. Sir, you are tempting me? Just so. 15,000 francs. Do you understand? Sir, let me see my right-hand correspondent. On the contrary, do not look at him, but at this. What is it? What, you do not know these bits of paper? Banknotes? Exactly. There are 15 of them. And whose are they? Yours, if you like. Mine? Exclaimed the man, half suffocated. Yes, yours. Your own property. Sir, my right-hand correspondent is signaling. Let him signal. Sir, you have distracted me. I should be fined. That will cost you 100 francs. You see, it is your interest to take my banknotes. Sir, my right-hand correspondent redoubles his signals. He is impatient. Never mind. Take these. And the Count placed the packet in the man's hands. Now, this is not all, he said. You cannot live upon your 15,000 francs. I shall still have my place. No, you will lose it, for you are going to alter your correspondent's message. Oh, sir, what are you proposing? A jest. Sir, unless you force me, I think I can effectually force you. And Monte Cristo drew another packet from his pocket. Here are 10,000 more francs, he said, with the 15,000 already in your pocket. They will make 25,000. With 5,000 you can buy a pretty little house with 2 acres of land. The remaining 20,000 will bring you in 1,000 francs a year. A garden with 2 acres of land? And 1,000 francs a year. Oh, heavens! Come, take them, said Monte Cristo, forcing the banknotes into his hand. What am I to do? Nothing very difficult. But what is it? To repeat these signs. Monte Cristo took a paper from his pocket, upon which were drawn 3 signs with numbers to indicate the order in which they were to be worked. There, you see, it will not take long. Yes, but do this, and you will have nectarines and all the rest. The shot told. Red with fever, while the large drops fell from his brow, the man executed, one after the other, the 3 signs given by the Count. In spite of the frightful contortions of the right-hand correspondent, who, not understanding the change, began to think the gardener had gone mad. As to the left one, he conscientiously repeated the same signals which were finally transmitted to the Minister of the Interior. "Now you are rich," said Monte Cristo. "Yes," replied the man, "but at what price?" "Listen, friend," said Monte Cristo. "I do not wish to cause you any remorse. Believe me, then, when I swear to you that you have wronged no man, but on the contrary have benefited mankind." The man looked at the banknotes, felt them, counted them, turned pale, then red, then rushed into his room to drink a glass of water, but he had no time to reach the water jug, and fainted in the midst of his dried herbs. 5 minutes after the new telegram reached the minister, Debray had the horses put to his carriage and drove to the Danglars' house. "Has your husband any Spanish bonds?" he asked of the Baroness. "I think so. Indeed, he has 6 millions worth." "He must sell them at whatever price." "Why?" "Because Don Carlos has fled from Bourges and has returned to Spain." "How do you know?" Debray shrugged his shoulders. "The idea of asking how I hear the news," he said. The Baroness did not wait for a repetition. She ran to her husband, who immediately hastened to his agent and ordered him to sell at any price. When it was seen that Danglars sold, the Spanish funds fell directly. Danglars lost 500,000 francs, but he rid himself of all his Spanish shares. The same evening, the following was read in Le Messager. By telegraph. The king, Don Carlos, has escaped the vigilance of his guardians at Bourges, and has returned to Spain by the Catalonian frontier. Barcelona has risen in his favour. All that evening, nothing was spoken of but the foresight of Danglars, who had sold his shares, and of the luck of the stock jobber who had only lost 500,000 francs by such a blow. Those who had kept their shares, or bought those of Danglars, looked upon themselves as ruined, and passed a very bad night. Next morning, Le Moniteur contained the following. It was without any foundation that Le Messager yesterday announced the flight of Don Carlos and the revolt of Barcelona. The king, Don Carlos, has not left Bourges, and the peninsula is in the enjoyment of profound peace. A telegraphic signal, improperly interpreted, owing to the fog, was the cause of this error. The funds rose 1% higher than before they had fallen. This, reckoning his loss and what he had missed gaining, made the difference of 1 million to Danglars. "Good," said Monte Cristo to Morrel, who was at his house when the news arrived of the strange reverse of fortune of which Danglars had been the victim. "I have just made a discovery for 25,000 francs, for which I would have paid 100,000. "What have you discovered?" asked Morrel. "I have just discovered how a gardener may get rid of the dormice that eat his peaches." End of chapter 61.
Oh, he's so smart. And so here we have part of one of his plots with the telegraphs. Very clever. And then we have, in the preceding chapter, chapter 60, we actually get something that you don't see very often in literature. We watch a character foreshadow what they know they are going to be doing later, all through that discussion with Villefort and his wife. Towards the end of that discussion, the Count is dropping us hints as to what's coming. Villefort doesn't get the clue until the very end, and then it's not even a clue to him. It's just something that's rather unnerving, that they're going to go and dine at this particular house, a house he wouldn't buy from his in-laws, even though he probably could have gotten a great deal on it, and it's a country house and it's beautiful. So there is some intrigue, but then there is also I thought one of the best sections, it's not just a line, it's a segment of the chapter ever, was his explanation about why he didn't want to go and learn about the telegraphs. And at first I thought, oh, ha ha ha, I don't want to go learn about that. Learning is for peasants. I thought that was the direction he was going to go in. But no, it was, if I go and learn about it, then it's not beauty anymore. It's not poetry. It's not ineffable. Then it just becomes a system of symbols, and anyone can do that. I want the magic. I actually did that with a couple of Shakespearean plays. There were several Shakespearean plays that I decided once I got out of college that I would just not read. I didn't read them in school. I wasn't going to read them out of school because instead I wanted to wait until I could see a really good performance done. Merchant of Venice was one of them. Two Gentlemen of Verona was another. And Midsummer Night's Dream was the third. And I missed seeing the fabulous Midsummer Night's Dream that toured. I think it actually was touring in 88, 89, 90. But I have since seen good versions of it, not magical. We've heard about some magical ones on the show, though. And I haven't seen Two Gentlemen of Verona. I still haven't read or seen it. And I'm about to turn 50, so that's a little scary. And I did see Dustin Hoffman do The Merchant of Venice in London when I was there at Oxford that summer in 1989, and he was phenomenal. Heartbreaking, partly because he's such a jerk for the beginning part, but by the end, it's kind of like the Count of Monte Cristo. By the end, you start thinking, wow, that's kind of a lot to punish the man with for what he did. And yikes. Which I think is exactly what Shakespeare wanted you to do. It's kind of like the way Jews celebrate Purim. The book of Esther starts with a great, rousing story. It ends in a bloodbath. And so the rabbinic recommendation is, and this goes way back in history, is between the beginning of reading the Megillah, the actual book of Esther. A Megillah would be the single scroll containing just that book. That's the whole Megillah. You're supposed to read the book of Esther out loud to everybody at the party, and you are supposed to proceed to get really, really drunk by the end, because that does two things to you. For one thing, it addles your brain, so you won't be thinking straight necessarily. But the other thing it does is it makes you a little sick to your stomach. And so as you're reading it, and after you get to the part where you're cheering because, yay, Esther won and Haman got destroyed and yay, it's all good stuff. By the time you get past that and into the rest of the story, you're feeling a little ill, and it's hard to tell if it's the wine or the story. And putting you in a position where that kind of moral, squishy gray zone, that kind of conundrum, is affecting you physically as well as intellectually, it makes the story work really, really well. And if you look at a lot of the books of the Bible, the early books of the Bible, there's a lot of how not to behave as well as how to behave. And the beginning of Esther is definitely how to behave. And then it's followed by this destruction, kind of like the Count of Monte Cristo. Because in the beginning, we cannot forget what happened to Edmund. His life was shattered, completely destroyed, erased from history. The few people who remember him for him, just who he was, are very few. And I would argue really the only one who really does remember him is Mercedes, and we haven't seen her for many chapters at this point. As we continue through the book, especially from this point on, pay attention to if you start to get a little uncomfortable with what the Count is up to. It'll be interesting to track. All right, that's it for me for today. Thank you so much for listening and for being here and for supporting us on Patreon and being in the group on Facebook and putting up with my absences when life just broadsides me like it did. And there will be a Cat Came Back this weekend for you. It's already loaded. And that's it. Thank you so much. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you like getting free audiobooks with benefits every week, please consider supporting the show over at patreon.com/craftlit. There are rewards waiting for you beyond, the free podcast. You can also subscribe to our premium streaming audio by tapping the red lock when you are looking at the app or at the show notes at craftlit.libsyn.com/podcast. You can also sign up for a premium download subscription by following the links in the right-hand sidebar at craftlit.com. And if it's easier for you, you can always subscribe and review at iTunes and at Stitcher Radio. Like us on Facebook, support us at Patreon, and come with us on tour. For 9 years, Craftlit has been kept going by the support of you, the listener. And for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on